Some 54 councillors and 103 municipal workers have been gunned down in targeted political killings in South Africa since 2000, as observers point out the lack of political will to prosecute the murders doesn't bode well for the 2024 polls. Elected mayors and political position and party holders are also in the gunman shooting range. And of course, to shed more light on this very, very unfortunate events in South Africa is Collins Mweke, Global Affairs Analyst, who joins from Brussels. Collins, thank you for joining the program.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you for having me.
I mean, it's glad to have you. It's really disturbing in terms of the, what I call it, figures and also research done. Now, I would start this conversation by a quote from that's Vuyu Zungula, a lawmaker for the opposition African Transformation Movement, where he said it's a crisis and it's a disturbing trend. Now, my question to you is this. Why does this seem to be a trend during political seasons, particularly in towns like KwaZulu-Natal and Durban in South Africa?
Two reasons. Number one is the fact that the epicenter of political killings in South Africa, which is KwaZulu-Natal, is a very, very politically volatile region of South Africa. And linked to that is also the fact that, they share border with Maputo, with Mozambique, actually, and it is known that in Maputo, Mozambique, that, guns are running free on the street. And so it is easy to cross over to, KwaZulu-Natal, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry then, has access to illicit guns. That is one block of the reason. The other block of the reason is, simply put, lawlessness. Now, let us not forget that South Africa, under a very, very long time, was under apartheid, regime. And so, in the period after, post-apartheid, I think it is fair to say that a lot of the lawlessness that had been created, a lot of criminality that had been created during apartheid regime actually crossed over. And so people are yet to grasp, the relevance of political campaigning, negotiations and all of that, and still believe in force to be able to win power. And so that is still lingering on. And, many years after, nearly 30 years after the collapse of apartheid, that, the killings are still rising, actually points indeed to a very, very disturbing trend in terms of how long more will it take to, put this under control. Yes, it is seriously worrying.
All right, I'll get back to you, Collins, but also joining the conversation right now is Marcus Hilton, that's research analyst from South Africa. Thank you for your time, Marcus.
Very good, sir. Happy to be here.
All right, Marcus, I would also like to know why exactly this, has seemed to become a trend, a very disturbing trend that seems unabated in the country.
Thank you so much. And I think I'd like to just give credit to the previous colleague. Their narrative with regards to how this links back to the apartheid era does link valid within this conversation. But perhaps it'll be great to provide a preamble. Inequality in South Africa, which also dates back to the apartheid era, is amongst the highest in the world. According to the World Bank, South Africa is the highest income inequality in the world with a Gini coefficient of about 0.6%. Unemployment at the current moment is about 32% as of the third quarter of 2023. And alas, the correlation between crime and unemployment is high, with South Africa ranking 5th According to the Numbeo Crime Index, ahead, or rather behind, of Venezuela, Papua Guinea, Afghanistan, and Haiti. Now, if you compound that with political rivalry, economic incentives, in other words, being politicians holding a position in local government, can come with access and resource opportunities. Hence the call for transparency around campaign funding for political parties, solely because crime might be linked to perhaps a third party funding a political party for the sake of interest. And interestingly, legislation was passed in 1997 by Parliament to regulate government funding for political parties. But unfortunately, it did not cover the private and corporate donation sector. Now, you compound that further with criminal activity, corruption and patronage networks, you create conditions that are conducive for political murders and crime, with the outcome being profit or economic gain for whoever might be financing or playing part and parcel of these political murders. As it stands, over 54 councillors in South Africa have been murdered. Over 103 workers who work for municipalities have been gunned down in targeted political killings since the 2000s. And the lack of political will to prosecute these murders doesn't bode well for 2024.
I mean, we'll even get to that. I would like to go to the aspect where you talked about unemployment and you know, as being one of the factors. From a particular report, it has it that this particular targeted killings even have what you would call a payment scale. For instance, the bounty for the head of a councillor or politician is settled at around 20,000 rand and 40,000 rand. That's about $1,000 to $2,000. And of course, these prices, you know, differ. It seems to be a very organized network, or a very organized cartel, so to speak. Why exactly do you, I mean, at councillor level, why do you have so much interest in this position? Is it as a result of the yearning to really serve, or because of the largesse that comes with such office?
I think it's probably balance or imbalance between the two. Some councillors actually get into this position to serve their communities because they come from the same positions of inequality and disadvantage, whether historically or contemporarily so. And it is well known that South Africa has got a strong network of corruption and patronage networks, and criminal activity is fairly high in South Africa. I think we've got some of the highest murder rates in the world. So when it comes to councillors, some might actually get into that position solely due to funding from either private or a criminal donor that seeks to access certain resources, certain tenders that can put them in a better economic position. Therefore, they'll fund the campaigns of these councillors and whatnot to get into those positions so that they can see a return in their investment. And I think, as my other colleague was actually mentioning previously, KwaZulu-Natal is some of the highest murders of these councillor murders, solely because of the, you know, I think of the apartheid or historical perspective that puts the African National Congress and the IFP in one segment where they've been constantly fighting for power within these regions. And even if you do a simple search of literature online, you find that in South Africa, most of these political murders are centered within the KwaZulu-Natal province. And why could that be the case? Political competition, economic disparities, patronage and corruption networks that date back to the apartheid era, local governance, and not to forget the inequality that currently exists at this very moment that could potentially be governing that. So when people find themselves in positions of inequality, they tend to take the criminal route to fend for themselves. And I won't even limit it to the political sphere. One of the biggest artists in South Africa, AKA, was murdered in KwaZulu-Natal by a hitman. It's a culture. It's a culture, and that culture dates all the way back to the apartheid regime, and that's fueled by the inequality that we're currently struggling with as a nation in South Africa.
All right, I would like to go back to Collins. Now, KwaZulu-Natal is the country's most politically volatile province, and of course has been considered as the epicenter of the crimes which have been perpetrated, which have sharply escalated this year in the run-up to the 2024 polls. Now, in August, the former South African police commander, that's Jane Stein, actually said illicit guns wash in the same KwaZulu-Natal because they are supplied by gun owners and the neglect of police officers. Now, what do you think of this, particularly the, what I call it, the role of law enforcement in all of this?
Thank you for that question, my good sir.
I would like, okay, I actually directed it to Collins. I would take your opinion, but I would like Collins to first respond.
Thank you. Well, at the heart of your question, Dakbo, is the fact that corruption has a very, very serious role to play here. My colleague actually, hinted on the fact that the lack of political will to prosecute these murders is a major problem. Perhaps that is actually the reason that it has dragged on for this long. So it cannot be that these murders are happening and everyone in authority that ought to do something about this appears to be helpless. Now, the reason they are helpless is because it is actually serving their purpose. And so this is a political tool that has been entrenched in South Africa's political culture. And so the reluctance actually to tackle it is very, very high. Now, if it is ever going to be tackled, it will be tackled by the likes of Africa Transformational Party, who are small and perhaps less, powerful, no, certainly less powerful, but have much more to gain in a South Africa that is sanitized of these, murders. But lastly, I like to point to the fact that one of the ways that this thing has been sustained is the fact that politics has become so lucrative that if it is not de-incentivized in South Africa, I believe that these murders will continue to happen because these are people who are making investments, huge sums of money to finance, politicking. And the fact that a major oversight took place in the, previous constitutional or electoral reforms where they didn't quite capture the, huge issues around, political party financing, donation, and all of that is another major issue. Now, could that be really an oversight? I doubt it. I do believe that the loophole may have been left to provide a leeway for the most powerful to continue to use it. But the time now has come to close that gap if South Africa is going to move the pin on, addressing the political murders.
I would like to go back to Collins on this one. This time I would streamline it to the, what I call it, the involvement or the role of law enforcement in all of this. Is it that, they seem overwhelmed or outrightly handicapped, or is just corruption? Why is this happening under the watch of security agencies?
It is a combination of both. Number one, corruption is a major issue. Number two, I believe that if there is no synergy between the law enforcement agency and the politics in terms of the intentional presence of the political will to tackle the problem, the police will remain more or less helpless. And so between the two situations, corruption, but also the lack of political will, you then, have a very, very little situation. Now, both have got to be addressed, but I think that the priority here is to channel the most efforts to developing the political will to tackle the problem, and then the corrupt officers would actually be met by the long hands of the law when they are seen to have, acted below expectation. And so it is not a question of this or that. It is a question of both of them, being tackled simultaneously.
All right, I'd like to know Marcus' opinion on this one. Marcus, particularly with as regards the role of law enforcement.
I think law enforcement will then fall part and parcel of criminal activities. I think councillors may be targeted by criminal groups if they stand in the way of illegal activities to actually occur, and that is then compounded by weak law enforcement and impunity. And you find that in areas where law enforcement might be weak, there is a culture of impunity, political assassinations, which may be used as a means to settle disputes or remove opponents without fear or legal consequences. And I mean, there's a lot of theories surrounding how political and the law enforcement within KwaZulu-Natal and I think elsewhere in South Africa tend to work in hand, because without sounding too, for lack of a better word, without advocating any theories that might not necessarily align to this conversation, the person that leads our police officials in South Africa is currently a political official, right? And you find that within the KwaZulu-Natal, what's also driving these crimes is the disarmament process that actually occurred post the apartheid regime that found certain guns being put back onto the streets in certain political targeted areas, such as KwaZulu-Natal, due to the conflict that occurred between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the African National Congress, which also have certain links back to law enforcement. So that could also be part and parcel of why these political killings could be reigning rampant, because if they are working hand in hand, it's most likely that they could potentially get away with it. Hence, I did mention earlier that the lack of political will to actually address this political killings does not bode well for the 2024 elections.
I'm still staying with you, Marcus, on this one. Now, I would, of course, read a quote by Sifo Lumuka, that's KwaZulu-Natal's Community Safety Minister, where he said in an article sometime in October last year that councillor killings are an attempt to force by-elections. Do you share this opinion?
Councillor killings and I do share that opinion, my good sir, solely because that correlation does exist, and it's quite evident with the amount of murders and also the social unrest that has even occurred way before this political killings as of recency actually started to take root. If you remember, the social unrest that occurred a few years back, if I'm not quite accurate, perhaps my colleague might interject and provide some information, where some of the largest political and social unrest ever to occur in South Africa some 2 years ago, with a lot of lootings happening within the KwaZulu-Natal province. And this was around the same time that the previous president was being taken into custody for his political wrongdoings, and that was the former president, Jacob Zuma. So that correlation could potentially exist, and I'm only speaking toward around the data centered around that question.
All right, I'll move to Collins right now. What's your take? Do you think that some of these killings are actually to sort of bring about by-elections at the end of the day?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, there is this saying that it's not enough to identify crime and tackle crime. It is also important to, go to the root causes of these crimes and actually tackle them as well. So while we may talk about the menace of this crime and, of course, condemn political killing in no uncertain terms, I think it's important also to point very, very squarely at the disparity, in economic disparity, as a matter of fact, and then, pointing also to, high unemployment rate, social seclusions, and so on and so forth. These are also, things, factors that actually fuel the crime itself, because, I mean, you need to have a demand and then a supply. Now, vulnerable people are on the supply side of these guns. So it is so very easy to recruit, assassins when they have nothing meaningful to do. And, there have been some theories out there that political elites are actually not very much in a hurry to tackle some of these, social disparities and so on and so forth, just because they want to keep the people as vulnerable as possible to be able to continue to use them for their illicit activities. So there is a need for a sweeping reform, because when you even look at the pronouncements coming from the highest level of politics in South Africa, where the South African president is mentioning that there are 300 murders, in the last period, and the Association of Local Government, officials is keeping the number at, I believe, less than 90 as a matter of fact. So if you are not even certain of the numbers, if the top officials are, singing from different hymn books, now you begin to ask yourself, how then are you in a position to tackle, the situation? So It runs deep, and the solution has to be holistic.
All right, let me go back to Hollington. Let's fast forward into the election season that, of course, is just around the corner. Let's consider the implication of all of this as regards the quality of the election process that would commence shortly. What do you think needs to be done to sanitize the system at the moment, such that at the end of the day, the elections would emerge safe, credible, and of course produce the results that reflect the will of the people without intimidation or fear?
I think with regards to safety, credibility, and to avoid the intimidation of fear, given the amount of, or rather the short notice thereof, because these crimes have already occurred, I think the most important thing is to perhaps maybe at a lower level, the government must try their very best, or the internal electoral committee or the IAC must ensure that parties must be really transparent about where they are getting these funds from. These funds might be coming from patronage or criminal networks, which would also then ultimately drive intimidation and crime and thereof, because the crime occurs at a community level. And I think at the community level, it might be worthwhile to provide security mechanisms at the actual election polls. They must have police presence, and I guess in areas where it's highly contested by crime and whatnot, they need to perhaps maybe involve military presence at those places, because the crime that actually occurs in some of these communities, and I'm speaking from a political point of view, is quite intense. And it's quite intense to the very point that when people go to the voting placements that might actually vote for the parties that they've been coerced into voting for. And as far as credibility is concerned, I think the IEC must have mechanisms in place that ensure that there's no duplication of votes and there's no manipulation of identity documents that might be used for these political outcomes, to ensure that the ruling party or whatever party that might have control in specific areas to actually win the specific outcome, whether it's at a ward level, provincial level, or national level. I think those mechanisms would actually go a long way. I think the biggest one there being transparency on who's actually funding these political campaigns. Are they criminal networks? Are they big corporations? Or perhaps it's the politicians themselves that have the big pockets to actually ensure that they get the outcome that they want.
All right. I would also like to know the opinion of Collins on this one, particularly when it comes to the sanitation of the cleanup of the law enforcement, because some reports also allege that rogue police detectives are also contracted by hitmen, as hitmen actually, to sort of carry out this very, very dirty jobs, right? So what can be done to sanitize the security apparatus and also create some sort of confidence for people to contest and also to vote?
I agree completely with Marcus when he asserts that the solution has got to be localized in terms of, these crimes happening at the community level. And so the solutions to them have got to be, community-based, solutions. Now, at the community level, everyone knows everyone. And so those that perpetrate these crimes are known. they are, I mean, the police data is littered with the names of these individuals, and, you know, with even half-baked intelligence, they are able to know when new people are being recruited. So if the police really wants to tackle this problem, and the political elites are desirous to having the problem, you know, put under control, I believe that the playing field will be leveled up. The crime will, at least in the short term, be reduced, and so heavy police presence is equally necessary. Necessary in terms of building people's confidence that when they go out there to vote, that you know, they are going to return home safe and sound. So the police presence is equally important to build confidence. But you know, when it is all done and dusted, I mean, after the 2024 elections, I think deep-seated questions would have to be asked. Part of those deep-seated questions would have to be asked at the, you know, parliaments, where these issues are brought to the fore, and indeed a sweeping reform, you know, taking place to tackle the issue right up to the area of, you know, party financing, you know, tackling of criminal networks, having them, you know, access and influence over parties and, you know, political candidates. The major, you know, issues that in the long run.
I mean, Collins, we talk about a community level approach, but do people have enough confidence in the authorities to be able to walk up to them and say, you know what, I think my neighbor is actually a criminal. I want you to do something about it, without feeling that at the end of the day, they will be betrayed and their lives endangered?
Absolutely. Well, you are spot on that, because, you know, like I said earlier, everyone knows everyone. And so, you know, in a situation where there is less corruption within the police force, I think this issue can be, you know, tackled. But I do think that some sort of, you know, short-term reshuffle does need to take place. You know, at the highest level of the local, you know, policing apparatus, where new faces are brought in, people that could, to a large extent, be considered to be, you know, less corrupt, less politically exposed, even as, you know, police officers that may be above board. And so information campaign using, you know, local media, social media, is equally important to help to build the confidence of the local people that, yes, the police can be trusted. There are new faces within the system and all of that. Now, I wish I had the crystal ball, you know, that I can look into to tell me what other magic wand needs to be, you know, waved to be able to take all of these away. But I believe that there are known in low threshold solutions, like some of these that Marcus and I have outlined, that could be applied to at least contain it in the short term.
All right, Hollington, I would go to you right now, and I would actually read the, will I call it testimony, or the comment of someone who actually, you know, was given some sort of a description as to the situation on ground. Now, we said whenever a councillor is assassinated in KwaZulu-Natal, it's mostly the street-level hitmen who are arrested. The masterminds who hired the killers are rarely identified or prosecuted, as police are simply too afraid to go after the influential political godfathers who sponsored the murders, for fear of stepping on sensitive political toes. Now, my question to you, Hollington, is there really a way out of this?
I think that's a really difficult question, my good sir, I must say. But I think currently it's really difficult to find a way around that. because it's usually the person that pulls the trigger that goes to jail. And there's a reason why they're actually keeping quiet about these names, because some of these political figures actually have influences within the criminal systems themselves. Whether you go to jail does not necessarily mean that you're going to be safe. But I'd like to perhaps reiterate what my colleague previously mentioned. In South Africa, in most of the residential areas that are actually security conscious, the people that watch over the areas that people reside do not stay there for a long time. It's usually a reshuffling process. And why that occurs is to ensure that if someone has a specific influence in a certain area, then if you reshuffle, the authorities that are working and protecting the populations that stay in that area will not have as much influence if you bring somebody from a total different region to come and oversee the security of these people. And I think in the short interim, this is something that needs to be done. With regards to your question pertaining to whether something can be done at a high level, perhaps maybe a task team that is well aware of the influence that people at a political level actually have should be put in place to ensure that this power is limited. So much of a watchdog mechanism that ensures, or that is aware of the people that actually control and control the figures on the chessboard that might actually result in the outcome of their interest, but in the opposite manner, meaning that it will not work within their interest. If somebody that actually knows what's happening within the political sphere is put in place to ensure that there's people at a political level will actually navigate the political space in a fair manner.
Now, I would like to go back to you, of course, Collins. What does this portend, for democracy in South Africa? I mean, with all of this, of course, will be your wrap-up question on this particular topic.
Grim. The situation is grim, and I mean, while the search is out there to find a system of government that is better than democracy, we need to realize that if the outcome of an election cannot be trusted to represent the will of the people, democracy in itself has failed. And so the outcome of such election and leadership and the rest of them are actually impacted in a negative manner, because those handling the politics and the policies are not actually the people that the people that the populace elected. So yes, it is a very, very serious situation, and politics and democracy is endangered by it.
Gentlemen, Marcus Hollington, research analyst from South Africa, and also Collins Nweke, global affairs analyst from Brussels. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, my good sir.